Harry, good to see you, buddy. How you doing?
Nice to see you too. I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I've had a good day, so it's all good. Good to be here.
Well, look, our show is now out in the ether. People have started to download and listen, which is interesting. Thank you for everyone that's given us early feedback, including one client
Yes.
who sent me, I want to hear, A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, which I thought was a lovely touch. Someone listened and
Yeah. So
gave me that book today.
paying
So
attention.
it proves people have been paying attention. Absolutely right. We've had lots of.
Yeah, exactly. And I've had people reach out as well, both I know and don't know, who have listened to it and said, "Oh, that was really interesting. Can I learn more about that and everything?" So, yeah, it's good to know we're making a small dent and a little impact on our first few episodes already.
100%. Well, look, today I wondered if on that basis, if you wouldn't mind or be so kind, because we don't really plan what we're going to talk about. And I thought, you know what? We've had you what's in episode 5. It's now episode 6. We haven't yet talked about your leadership beat model, which is something that you've developed yourself. And actually, I don't
Yeah.
really know the story behind it. I know the beat model because I've read all your books. But I thought, you know what? This is something you've dedicated your life to for the last 10 years. It's absolutely related to mindset and mindfulness and
Mm.
self improvement and self help to a certain degree. So I'm going to give you the floor for a little bit, and what if you could, tell us the story behind the leadership,
Yeah.
exactly what it
Um,
is.
yeah. I'll tell you. So, I mean. I guess kind of full story. It's a framework and a philosophy for living life so that you can optimize your health, vitality, energy, mindset, and so on. And I actually did come up with it exactly 10 years ago, 2013. But it was a culmination of about 3 or 4 years of self-discovery. So around the time I met you, 2010, I actually left the London Stock Exchange, which I think you're aware of. And that's when we did our cycle trip. Immediately after that, I started doing various courses, and one of which was an NLP course, neuro linguistic programming, which is, I guess you could call it sort of an idea of, I guess not psychiatry, sorry. I guess psychology, an aspect of psychology, although psychologists won't like that. But it's all about how we do the things we do rather than why we do the things we do. Anyway, long story short, I met people at those courses, which led me to further investigate other courses, other events. And I started going in 2011 to tons and tons of different personal development events. And what I started noticing was that lots of successful people were talking about similar things. And so when they started talking about them, I started thinking, shall I do those things, right? And that might have been 5 out of 10 people talking about meditation, 7 out of 10 people talking about green juices, 9 out of 10 people talking about the importance of sleep. And slowly but surely, I started making lots of little changes to my life. Tiny changes, big changes, changes to my diet, changes to my morning routines, because people were talking about morning routines, people were talking about evening routines. And so over the subsequent couple of years, I made around 1 to 200 little changes in my life,
It's
right?
like
Be
marginal
that stopping.
gains.
Yeah, I mean, some were quite big ones, to be fair, right? So some big hitters were maybe like avoiding media news and changing aspects of my diet. But then other things which were maybe a little bit smaller might have been, well, some people it might be big, stopping using caffeine, right? Would have been one. So anyway, I made lots of these little changes. And then after about 2 years of doing that, I noticed, well, firstly, I noticed straight away that my life, my energy, my focus, my productivity, my relationships, everything increased. And I wasn't someone that was already like quite low. I was already quite high anyway compared to my friends, but I just noticed I went even higher in terms of um, my resilience, my ability to maybe bounce back from colds, or actually rather than getting 4, 5, 6 colds a year like I used to get, I probably got about one in the first 5 years of making changes, if that. And they don't last very long typically. And so anyway, after 2.5 years of these changes and thinking, look, my life has exceeded to levels that I didn't think possible before, my energy, my vitality, everything. I thought there must be a pattern, right? There must be a pattern to what I've been doing. So what I did is I took a giant sheet of, I guess, A0 paper or A1 paper, and I sat on the floor and I wrote down pretty much every change I could remember. I had a bunch of them written on the computer anyway. So I wrote down every little thing I changed. And I started looking at that, and then I noticed patterns. And what I noticed was that all of the hundreds of different changes that I'd made ultimately fell into one of four buckets. And I took a big marker pen and I just kind of circled around all the different changes. So I ended up with these four quadrants and thinking, actually, all those changes are to do with this. All those changes are to do with that. And I realized that actually everything to do with health, well-being, vitality, energy, longevity ultimately comes down to four things. And so that is what I now deem the leadership beat model. And the reason for the word beat is the word beat, B-E-A-N-T, stand for those four quadrants that I discovered. And the reason it's called leadership beat model, as opposed to originally it was called the energy beat model, because I thought it was all to do with energy. But what I subsequently realized is, well, two things really. One, that actually, if you want to be a leader, right, of anyone or even yourself, right, because ultimately the first person you need to lead is yourself. And so if you want to be the best self-leader, you actually have to be on point mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Because if you're not operating on all cylinders, you're not actually going to make the best decisions. You're not actually going to be able to stay resilient when those times are tough, or work those long days when you need to. So for me, I realized that it was all about being strong, vital, resilient. And at the time as well, I was working as a contractor and I wouldn't get paid if I wasn't in. So for me, it was really important to make sure I was energized and vitalized and not able to get ill, or if I did get ill, I could bounce back. But the reason I called it leadership is because I feel like we're all leaders, right? Even if the only person you lead is yourself. And another reason I called it that is because actually when I was, starting this out and I was wanting to help corporates and professionals, a lot of people, when they think about well-being, they weren't thinking about it 10 years ago in the same way they are now, but they would have it as like an add-on, like a nice little adjunct. It wouldn't be part of an established part of your budget necessarily. You might put a little bit of budget aside for a wellness Wednesday now and then, or a bit of fruit or a gym membership. But that's not what I was talking about. I was talking about something that is intrinsic to the development of your organization. Because if your leadership team, if your staff, if your employees are not operating fully, your bottom line won't be as full as it could be, won't be as robust as it could be. And so for me, it was all about leadership, because I wanted it to be part of a leadership development program, not just a well-being Wednesday sort of thing. So that's why it's called the leadership beat model. And we can quickly go over the B, E, A, and T in a moment. But the idea behind it being, if you want to feel on beat, all those four sections have to be in flow. Now, at some points in your life, you're going to focus on one section more than the other, and that's okay. It's not about being perfect all the time, as we always talk about. It's about having balance, but more importantly, understanding how to get back on balance when you go off balance. And if you do go off balance, you do it with awareness. So sometimes I am going to go off balance because of one reason or another, which we can talk about. And I know we want to talk about an aspect of the beat model later, which is actually quite relevant for when I go off balance. But it's about, how do you get back on balance? Because most people, to get energy, maybe first thing in the morning, they're shooting for that coffee. And then to de-stress, they're going for that cigarette break. And then to relax at the end of the night, they're going for that wine or something. And they're kind of like going zigzaggy really rapidly. Whereas what I'm talking about is like a nice smooth curve going on and off balance, but only a small amount, so that you know how to get yourself back on balance. So that's really what it's about. And the idea being that sometimes we feel offbeat in life, right? We don't know what's going on. And we think, why am I feeling offbeat today? It's going to be one of those areas from the B, E, A, or T.
Tell us what the B, E, A, T is, because I like
my
the
first. Yeah, so the first one, B, stands for brain. Now, most of the listeners maybe already know that my brand is called The Thought Gym, and even our tagline is train the mind and the rest will follow for the podcast, because the brain is a metaphor for mindset, psychology, gratitude, beliefs, values, emotions, and so on. And what I realized that, and this is why the brand is called The Thought Gym, is that first, everything really starts with a change of mindset. And that's when it becomes easy to change things, even though changing the mindset is the most difficult thing sometimes. But you then will shift your beliefs, shift your identity into the thing that will actually ultimately serve you. So when I made these changes, it wasn't actually that hard for me, because I had a massive shift in mindset. So B, it stands for brain. And that's all about, like I said, gratitude, language, beliefs, values, mindset, identity. Then the E stands for elements. So this is all about how you nourish your body from the inside and out. So this includes, so we have 5 elements. So these are the 5 elements of ancient Greek culture, because I'm Greek after all, and they all factor in. Actually, I have to credit my brother-in-law for coming up with the word elements, because originally for me, the E stood for eat, because it was about what we eat in our body. But actually, he goes, actually, it makes more sense that you call it elements. And the reason is this: 5 elements: air, water, earth, fire, and ether. These are 5 things that surround you or nourish you inside and out. So air is a metaphor for breathing, right? So breath techniques are very popular these days: Wim Hof breathing, pranayama, yogic breathing. So it's all about how we nourish ourselves with the air that we breathe and the different breathing techniques to give us energy. Water obviously stands for water, but there's a lot more to water than just drink water. So that's a whole, chapter in my new book, quite complicated. Then earth is also about our relationship to the earth, as well as the food that we get from the earth. So it's not just about what we eat, but also how we interact with the earth. Okay, things like grounding or earthing, as they're called, which is basically being barefoot on the ground or on the earth, and the connection that you get to the earth and the positive effects you get from that. And fire is all about sunlight, vitamin D, being outdoors. Okay, the great big fireball in the sky. And then ether is this environment around you. So ether is typically what they used to think space was made of. And it's the space within the space, or the force, if you like Star Wars. But it's the space around you. So that is about your physical environment. So is your physical environment set up, like, for example, your office, is that nice and neat and tidy? Because typically you're more focused, you have better, more energy when your things are tidy. If you're in a messy environment, most people at least, they're not going to work as efficiently as if they're in a tidy environment. So it's that, but also, is your environment set up for movement and activity, right? Maybe you have a chin-up bar in your doorway. Maybe you've got a standing left desk like I've got. So that's the physical environment. But then you've also got your personal environment. So that is, most people don't think about their shampoos or their conditioners or their face creams that they put on their body. I know you're big on not using sun cream a lot of the time, right? Because you're aware of all of that. So it's about that physical environment. And then the last part, you've got the physical environment, the personal environment, and then you've got the invisible environment. So that is the world of EMFs, Bluetooth, radio frequencies, and the effect that those have on your body. So that's elements. Then we go to activity, which is all about the things that you do in a day. Not just exercise, but more importantly than exercise, it's movement, but also about habits, routines. It's about whether you play, whether you have fun, whether you laugh, whether you've got passion in life, purpose, whether you offer yourself in service, like volunteer to other people, and also what we may cover in a moment, which is connection, right? Connection to others. So I call it PSPC: passion, service, purpose, and connection. So activity is all around that. And then finally, we've got T, which is the section that a lot of people maybe skip out on, especially if you're a high achiever, and that is tranquility. So that is about how you rest, repair, rejuvenate the body. For example, sleep, meditation, fasting, something I call digital nutrition. There's massage, there's time off, there's holidays. So that's all about repairing, rejuvenating the body. So you've got pretty much everything that I've come across since then, since discovering this 10 years ago, falls into one or more of these 4 quadrants. And I simply ask myself, if I'm feeling offbeat today, what do I need to focus on from the B, E, A, or T to get me back on beat? Because I might, and again, a lot of these learnings came to me intuitively or through experience. But what happened was, let's say I've slept well, and I've done my green smoothie, and I've exercised, and I've done all the things that we think we should be doing. So why am I feeling low in energy? Well, actually, it's because I haven't seen anyone for 4 or 5 days, because this literally happened to me when I was discovering this 10 years ago.
I
started working from
you
home.
reached out to me and you were talking about having a lack of connection. That's where you're going to go with this, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because at that time, I think you're in the middle of your beat model discovery mode, and you reached out to me. We hadn't spoken probably since the last cycle tour. And you're like, and you and I have spoken at length about your lifestyle, to be fair, not just about the beat model, but the way you live your life, and there's differences in the way you live yours than I live mine. But I remember you reaching out and saying, I'm lacking connection. I'm doing everything right. I don't understand why my model this isn't working. And you realized that you wanted to reach out and you made connections and you saw people.
Yeah.
You probably hibernated a little bit, writing all your manifestos, and realized you hadn't seen.
Oh yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
writing books and ideas is the worst thing for your health a lot of the time. But what's funny in the last few years, during the pandemic, in particular, at the beginning, is that people started discovering the things that I discovered years ago, where the importance of connection, the importance of being outside and getting fresh air, more so than just the exercise and the sleep, because that's, what's really important a lot of the time. I mean, all of this is important. And yeah, like you said, I realized, oh, actually, I haven't spoken to anyone for 4 days, right? And then suddenly, 3 years ago, everyone is thrust into the same way I was in 2013, where they're working from home. And actually, still, a lot of people are still working from home a lot of the time now. And they haven't gone back full time. And a lot of people that are going back are because they want the connection, not because they necessarily, need to work there. They can still probably work from home, but they want the connection. And so, yeah, the beat model came back through that. It came back through personal experience, through observing high-performing individuals across different industries. It also came from observing nature and also babies. So babies are a good teacher for me as well. So I observe what they do, and I incorporated that into the beat model. So everything I do effectively now is to promote this idea of healthy, vibrant living, and the beat model is a perfect framework for that, because other things that I hear about, they put piecemeal by piecemeal, but it doesn't come together quite like this.
It's interesting you highlighted sun creams for me. It's funny how things land and you remember it. So I've got no issue wearing sun cream, by the way, which is an interesting thing. But my mum has an issue with sun cream. So you mentioned baby. So my mum runs a extremely successful international baby franchise, and she'll always say, you shouldn't put sun cream on baby skin because it's full of chemicals and things that play around with hormone levels. And I don't know the ins and outs. I'm not an expert here, but I think there's play around with estrogen and different bits that impact baby development. And she's always said she had lots of companies approach her, some big names, saying, can you, as a founder of this major corporation of baby products, can you endorse it? She's like, I can't endorse it unless it's 100% safe. And to date, I don't think anyone's been able to provide not in terms of a well-known brand anyway, 100% safe solution. And that's because it, as you mentioned, it can interact with our bodies, not always positively. Yes, it protects from the rays, but actually some of these chemicals in these products can do damaging things in different ways. But I go slightly off point.
There's other ways to protect yourself. So I mean, I only really use sunscreen when we do our cycle rides, because it's a little bit trickier there because we're in our little shorts and t-shirts. But when I'm in Cyprus, for example, I will have a hat. I'll wear like a long sleeve white shirt if I'm moving between places, and then I will get the sun, because remember, part of my model is fire, and actually people are afraid of the sun. But I mean, people need different amounts of sun, but the rule of thumb that I usually use is you need about half the amount of time as it takes for your body to go pink. So let's say you're a little bit fairer skinned than me. Let's say it takes you 40 minutes for your skin to go to kind of almost burn. You want to spend maybe 20 minutes in the sun between, say, 11 a.m. and 3 at some point. You don't need really more than 20 minutes every other day, or in this is in the summer months in the Northern Hemisphere. And so once I get that in Cyprus, which I just do by walking between, like from the beach to the house or to the shops, I do that like without anything on, and my body gets used to it. But I'm not going to be out in the sun playing volleyball for like 3 hours in the middle of the day.
So one thing, when you're talking about, you're not going to be out in the extreme. So let's break this down a little bit, because you and I live our lives very differently. I have nothing but respect for your beat model. I know all the effort and time and research you put into it. So this isn't about critiquing necessarily, but I think it's interesting for those listening. They might go, you know what, that all sounds great. In reality, if I was to break down how you live your life now with these 200 different and probably more as time has moved on, sort of changes, marginal changes and some bigger changes in others that you've made to your life. One of those, obviously, diets. I know I've been to your parents' house, like barbecues and other things. You pretty much cut me out of your diet. Occasionally you'll go offbeat, as you put it, and divulge. So you wouldn't. I know you don't like being labelled anything, but for the most people, they would see you managing a relatively vegan-esque type diet. You see certain things out of your diet. In terms of evening, then for me, you use the word extremes. In the way that I live my life, some of these things are extreme. So you don't have any blue light or very little blue light in your house. You'll wear blue light emitting sunglasses after 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And the way, when you talk about digital fasting or the way you manage it, I mean, you literally cut out all digital products to a degree where most people would say it just wouldn't work for me for whatever reason. Like they would say the way you're living your life is extreme. I would say the way I'm not willing, and there's a lot of willness in here, I'm not willing to make some of those changes. However, I will probably go a little bit of the way each time, not the whole way, even though reading your model, it tells me that if I did do that, maybe I'll have a better, more vitality and other things. But for whatever reason, I'm not willing to make what I would call sacrifices, even if they're for the better good, to go to the extreme levels that you have. So for the layman listening, what are the core things that you would narrow down to go, okay, if you can't go to the levels that I've got yet, and maybe they'll start that journey and follow the path to your level later on, what are the key things that you would recommend for a healthy mind, healthy body?
Okay. I mean, before I go into that, I'd like to maybe offer 3 counter arguments to what you just said in terms of
Only
things.
3.
So the first, let's see if I can remember them all now, because I had them in my head and I thought, right, okay. Well, the first thing is the beauty of and this will touch upon your question, but the beauty of the beat model is that there are a plethora of things that go into it, right? So it's not being, you don't have to do 100% of the things 100% of the times, right? So that's the beauty, is that lots of things, some things are going to be bigger hitters than others, which I think is the question you're getting to, really. What are the big hitters that are going to make the biggest difference?
Actually, no, I don't think it is what I'm getting to. I think what I'm getting to is how can we make this a system where people listening can make enough marginal changes to start getting the benefit of your model. So without having to go the whole way, where they can start to feel the benefits, even if they're not willing to go the full hog.
Okay. All right. I will come to that then. Before that, let me come to the other 2 counterpoints as well. So, so the first one was that firstly, there's lots of things that you can do within the beat model, which is great. So you don't have to do everything that I do. The second thing is that, well, what you see as extreme or like a sacrifice is what I consider like other things extreme. Like, for example, let's say changing your diet being extreme, right? And I heard this example, I think from Nourish, who's someone that came up with this, probably the only diet that has been proven to reverse heart disease. And it's now, his system is available, I think, on some sort of Medicare in the US. And he said, you say changing your diet is extreme, people will never do it. But actually what I consider is cutting someone's chest open and clearing clogged arteries and putting a heart bypass extreme. So for me, I consider those other things, those eventualities, extreme. And I guess what I'm doing is I'm sacrificing, in some people's mind, something today so that I don't have to sacrifice later. However, like I said, the B of the beat is brain, and it's all about your mindset. And so for me, I don't see any of those things as a sacrifice, or it's just like when you were 8 years old, there was probably favorite sweets that you had, right? If you were to go into a shop now and those sweets were still available, you probably wouldn't even be consciously aware that they even exist. You're not feeling that's a sacrifice to say no to that sugar curly whirly or whatever the favorite.
I know exactly what the suit. I was an Army and Navy and aniseed ball nut, and I would go straight for both of those 2 buckets.
But when you go into a shop now, do you seek it out? Maybe if you saw it.
100%. Yeah, because it brings back good.
Well, you're counteracting my argument then. But most people, they've got things that they did in the past that they now don't do, that they're not drawn to doing. They've just fallen away. It's not like you're having to resist it.
So I'm in agreement with pretty much everything in your model, right? So I'm not trying to be contrarian for the sake of it, but there are certain things.
No, I like the voice of the kind of layman though.
I mean, diet was always going to come out at some point because we have very different diets in the way that we live our lives. And I know, by the way,
I also want to come to my third. I want us to come to my third rebuttal as well.
We'll come back there. That's all right. But you know, I know that I could be more optimal with my diet, particularly from a sporting aspect, right? And I know that I've had a donut today. I shouldn't have had donuts. That's not good for anybody. There's no goodness in a donut bar high calories and fat, right? And I get that. So there are things that I know I can make improvements for. However, I don't when you watch, there's lots you use the cutting open the stomach and bringing out that's all well and good, all right, but that doesn't happen for every single person every single time, and it's very easy to go to the extreme end of the scale. And there's loads of documentaries out there if you use veganism as a reason, or people that want to convince others not to eat meat, and they'll take you to the extreme and they'll show you all these athletes that are performing really, really well on vegan diets, but won't show you all the athletes doing really, really well on non-vegan diets. Or they will, let's be fair, when it comes to veganism, there hasn't really been a study yet. So they'll say, well, a vegan diet in this particular example, I'm not saying this is your argument, by the way, but it's a common argument, is a healthier diet than a non-vegan diet, right? And they'll say that they'll point to things like higher diabetes, higher heart failure, and all these different heart disease, all these things that come in on non-vegan diets. But it's not a like-for-like study, because more people, the general populace, will have more heart disease. Just by saying you're a vegan automatically gives you more awareness, and this is all about awareness, of your dietary intake. So to make that a like-for-like study, you need to compare it with someone who's already very aware, probably a sporting elite person across both studies, who's very conscious every day of what they put in their bodies. And you really need to follow them over a lifetime to understand whether there's any disproportionate levels of heart disease or anything else. For two people, one lives a vegan lifestyle, one doesn't, who've been consciously aware of what they put in their bodies all the way through. So compare it to a populous study of the whole of the world, just doesn't work, because it's always going to be skewed. Because just by saying you're vegan or vegetarian or pescatarian, whatever it is, you're automatically admitting that you are more conscious of what you put into your body. And when you're more conscious and aware, you make better choices. So that's one. That's
okay.
One counter. I'll let you go. Don't worry.
Well, actually, you have made my third point.
Okay, go for
me.
it.
So my third rebuttal to your original statement earlier was that what I'm teaching predominantly more than anything is awareness, right? And so if you do something with awareness, like you have that donut and you're aware, okay, for me, I mean, I don't really like donuts so much, but I might have something else.
Sure.
What did I have? I had something. Oh, I was at my sister's the other day, and I bought some gluten-free bread, but I wanted some butter on it. And I don't have butter. I never have butter.
I'm listening. I'll get the lights back on. It's gone dark here, but
yeah,
I am in.
No worries. So I don't normally have butter. And I thought, you know what? I can't remember the last time I had butter. It was probably 10 years ago. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to have it. And I kind of know what it's going to do to me, in that I typically, not to be too graphic about it, I'll need the toilet like pretty soon afterwards, within 10 minutes. And I thought, you know what? I'm just at home. I'm by myself. I'm not out at a restaurant. I'm not chatting with anyone. I'm not doing anything. And I fancy bread and butter, which I haven't had for years and years. And so I had that. But I did that with full awareness about what it was going to do. And it also gives me a bit of a runny nose. But because it wasn't that important to me to have a clear sinuses that moment in time, I didn't really care. So for me, it's like, make the choice you want to make, but do it with awareness about the consequences. And also, I don't want people to think that I think, oh, being a vegan is healthier or not, because my thoughts have evolved over 10 or 12 years about this quite substantially. And I think we should do a whole episode once on, which I think we should call like diet wars or something like that. I think that would be a good
one, right? Because
about.
You've studied this for the last 10 years, and I'm a qualified sports nutritionist. So although I haven't practiced at a professional capacity, I've done the qualification. So we can have a good conversation about that. I'm going to save that.
Yeah, so I think it's a bigger discussion than we're going to afford right now. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it's about awareness. So that was the third point. I mean, so it was about, firstly, that the beat model has got lots of different things that people can lift and shift and make their own. And I always say, and at the front of my new book, I use Bruce Lee's quote, which I love, one of Bruce Lee's quotes, right? Absorb what is useful, discard what is not, and add what is uniquely yours. And that is the beauty with the stuff I teach. And the things I learned is I took from lots of people, I tested it, I saw for myself, I ditched what I didn't like, and I kept what I did like. So that was the first thing, is that there's something for everyone in that beat model. The second thing is, I don't see things as a sacrifice, because I'm using today so that I don't have to use tomorrow in pain. And I say, okay, the heart being cut open is an extreme, but what isn't extreme is that most people are living in very suboptimal. Yeah, right.
By the way,
and the third thing is have that awareness.
I mean, I'm fully sold on your beat model anyway, so this isn't to challenge it in any way. But what I want to do is I want to bring it in.
I like being challenged, by the way. I like being challenged.
typically we debate more than we get on. Well, that's wrong. We debate a lot. As a lot of our conversations is arguing one way or the other. But I think what I wanted to do is the people that are listening, I don't want them to actually, I love your beat model so much. I don't want them to dismiss it because they feel like they have to go to an extreme. That's probably where I wanted to go with it, really. Raising awareness.
Yes. So I'm going to cover that question that you had about what can they jump in at and do.
So we'll come back. But one thing I think absolutely in full agreement with is raising awareness is all this podcast is going to do, right? It's raising awareness. Awareness leads to insight. Insight leads to action. Action leads to change. Hopefully we're going to make those changes, those actions, those insights going to lead us to positive changes. The brain, I love in your beat model. We know the brain is responsible for 80% of our energy expenditure anyway. That's how powerful this thing is. So we need to make sure we're feeding it well, and if we can feed it optimally, great. And we also need to be aware of how many calories it consumes and just how vital this is as an organ, as a thing that controls our thoughts, our thinking, our feelings, and all the different things that go with it. So if you get that bit right, as you said, if you get the brain right, the rest will follow to a certain degree, right? So totally get that. And actually we will go into a separate conversation another day on the diet. But interestingly, I did go the extreme way, as you know. So I then decided, I read Rich Roll's famous vegan ultra running athlete, and he challenges you at the end of the book. And typical me, I like to do things all in or not, right? So end of that book, he laid down the challenge, follow this. I think he said follow it for 28 days. And if you're not converted by veganism after that point, but you will be, brackets, then you never will be. So I did that to the letter. And I did it in preparation for the Excalibur Marathon, which is a marathon up in North Wales in the mountains. And I followed as a sports nutritionist anyway. I always made sure I had colourful things on my plate, 5 different colours, trying to get all different nutrients, whatever. Somewhere I obviously got it wrong. And maybe going full hog overnight into a vegan diet, my body rejected them. It was not happy. You like bread and butter. If I have coconut, mate, I'm in exactly the same way. That's another thing. But when we got to marathon day, I ran it feeling like I'd fueled well on this new vegan diet. Would have been roughly day 27, 28 of the diet. I was just about to finish. It was kind of the bit to say to me, is this the right path for me? And this performance will tell me the story. Now, we know there's more to it than just a simple thing, but ultimately I'd done the training and I've trained for races all my life, so that wasn't a problem. So the only real thing I changed in that preparation was my diet. That race was the hardest marathon I've done in my life. I've run a 250 marathon. That marathon took me nearly 5 hours. I bonked so badly on my diet. Lucy turned up, my wife, to wait for me at the finish. And literally there were pensioners coming in. And she was like, what on earth has happened to Nick? I was walking, like whatever it was, from an endurance perspective, I hadn't fueled well enough. Whether it was the day before, I'd actually had a really faint feeling a couple of days going in. So I was playing football with the kids in the garden. I went really faint. Something my body needed. Now, I'm not saying I must have meat. That's not my intention. But I think going suddenly to the full extreme of the scale, for me, wasn't right. And I tried it. I followed Rich Roll's plan, and he would told me I'd be convinced. Actually, what it did do, it threw me the other way and made me realize that I need to be mindful of what I eat. The awareness was there, but going extreme for me wasn't the right path. And it brought me back. I eat anything pretty much. I am very conscious actually. Put in my mouth, despite the fact I say I eat donuts, I do those things. But I exercise around it. I try and be relatively mindful. It depends where I am in my training cycle as well. It depends what I eat. But I think what I want to bring to the masses here is, I think about to go there about raising awareness. I want everyone who listens to this to follow your beat model because it just makes sense. But I want them to make it accessible for them. So let me bring it back to you. How can we make the beat model accessible, knowing we can raise awareness about food? We've kind of covered that maybe. One thing that I really want to talk about was social connection, because I've had a week where I've been to one of my closest friends growing up wedding, which was amazing. And I met old school friends when I was at the wedding. I then came back from the wedding. I had a whole week off with the kids, which was great with the family, which was very rare. So away from work, a bit of a digital detox because I wasn't on email and on my phone, all the other bits. My wife may disagree, but I'll say I was on it less than usual. And then finished it on the Saturday with one of my friend's 40th birthday parties where we danced the night away. And I think what was really interesting for me during that social connection piece was the joy. I think joy is the right word. The joy we got as a family and as friends, dancing with each other, singing, talking about old times. It's such a lift. And it was like, wow. The one thing I want to talk about is actually the hormones, the way it impacts the brain, the way that we feel good. I know we know that
Yeah.
endorphins are behind highs, and actually we know social connections can release endorphins. But actually, when you take it a level further and you start dancing, it's not just about social connection, but you can, maybe this is going the difference of going to extreme here. If you dance with somebody, I dance with my daughter, my wife, where you don't really care, you don't care if anyone's watching, that just creates a whole new level of high. And I did some research, and I realized that actually there's another class of brain chemicals that get released, because I was so interested to know why I felt such a high. And people may be aware of it. You release something called endocannabinoids, which are literally the same chemicals mimicked by cannabis. So I think
Yeah.
that neuroscience have described it as the don't worry, be happy chemicals. But that's how you feel. So wow, 5 minutes of this a day with my daughter, and I'm going to be buzzing. So no, I wanted to bring that up, but I wanted to.
Well, no, I mean, so absolutely. Interestingly, connection. So connection in the beat model, which comes under activity, is about emotional connection and physical connection as well. So the dancing, what's great with dancing is there's also physical touch, 100%. Which is really good for you. But it's about emotional and physical connection, both to other people but yourself. But you may have heard of the Gantt study. I think it's called the Gantt study. And it's the longest running study, I think, on health and well-being. I think it was started in the 1930s out of Boston. And they took students from people from a deprived area, and then people from the student population in Harvard. I think, incidentally, actually, JFK was at one point enrolled in that study at some point in the career. Anyway, that ran for about 85, 90 years. It's still running now. And what they noticed, several conclusions, but one big thing that was quite interesting was that what indicated how healthy a person would be at 80 years old when they looked at them at 50 was not things like, their diet or their diabetes level, their heart disease or their blood pressure, but was the strength of their social connections. Those with the strongest social connections at 50 were likely to live longer and be healthier at 80, despite blood pressure, medications, all of these things. It's so important. It's one of the things that I feel, if I'm looking at the beat model myself, there's a couple of things that I probably fall down the most at. One is connection, right? I feel I've got a strong family connection, but I don't have my own family, as it were, but I've got, my sisters and parents and things like that. So, and also because I'm of that age where a lot of my friends have their own families, they're kind of hanging out with their family. Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, we tried to hang out last week. We were both only 20 minutes away, actually, near Brighton, and it's easier for me because I'll say, oh, I can just go, but you've got like 2 kids to think about, and wife, and all of those other things that you've got to sort out. So for me, the connection piece is something I need to work on, and there's a couple of other sections as well. But what I said about balance before, and I think I mentioned right at the beginning, is that if I focus on one area of the beat model, I may take a hit in other areas. So one of the things that I sometimes go and do is I go on these kind of personal development seminars, which maybe last a few weeks. So one in particular I go to a couple of times anyway is one called Mind Valley. It's like a TED Talks meet Burning Man. Yeah. And so when I go on those, I'm going primarily, as are many people, for connection. Now, what that tends to ultimately mean, if I'm honest, is that there's later nights than I would normally have. There's more alcohol than I would normally have. There's less sleep than I would normally have. So I know I'm going to take a hit. And like we've talked about the Aura Ring before. The Aura Ring, every July that I've gone, I see massive hits in like my stats, because I get a lot of increase in my step count, but I get massive hits in terms of amount of sleep I get, my heart rate variability. My heart rate is always up on the nights I have a drink, because I normally alternate nights anyway. And you can see this wave going of when I'm drinking and not drinking. But I know for that 2-3 week period that my other sections will take a hit because I'm focusing on that connection piece. And this is what I'm talking about is, once you're aware of all the things that actually will optimize you, you get to pick and choose what you need to focus on at any given moment in time. Because the reality is that some people can actually do very well focusing on one area, right? You might find someone who is super passionate about their business and they work all hours. They like Elon Musk, maybe, right? He like sleeps like 3 hours.
I am recording this while still being sat in my office at 8:30. So okay.
Exactly, yeah. You're working really hard. You're super passionate, and you've got all the energy of a 2-year-old, right? But at some point, it might be 5 months in the future, 5 years in the future, 20 years in the future. Unless you have balance across all 4 areas overall, something's going to come crumbling down.
I quite like that, because this links to something we talk about. Well, actually, links back to your beat model of the brain. I'll get to where I'm going with this in a minute. But you talked about stress. So I'm in the office now. It's 8:30, thereabouts. It's late. I should probably go home. I'm going to try and do a run yet before I go to bed, and different things to happen before the rest of the evening. But actually, if you do too much of one thing, that stress response continues to grow, and eventually you can work from. We're very familiar with the word stress. Public are familiar with the word stress. Public are familiar with the word distress in particular. But that's the other side. People aren't familiar. There's a curve. You talked about the curve when you say on your Urving, where you drink, it curves. For me, it probably just flatlines, but it goes up and down. But there's the other side of the curve. So distress is when you hit your optimum, you start going downhill. You go downhill, you're in distress. That's the other side of the curve. But going up the hill, there's something called eustress, which is, when has everyone even heard of eustress in the public domain? No one ever talks about eustress. You hear things called stretch goals, or when we're in that stretch zone. That stretch zone essentially is that eustress part of the zone where we feel like we are being challenged, but when we're at that challenging zone where we're actually working at our optimum, we create. Purpose doesn't come from consumption, it comes from production. And then the sooner people recognize that, the quicker they can find fulfillment in their lives. That's why the journey is more than the destination, right? But you need to be challenged in that journey. If that journey is too easy, we don't get the same level of response at the end. We don't get that feel of euphoria at the end. So you're in that eustress curve. What happens is you do the same thing every day. That eustress slowly builds until it becomes stress and distress going down the other side. So we need to put ourselves back into check. Now, the reason I bring that up, you mentioned the word stress. We talked a bit about social connection and why that's important, the mind value, all those things. But you've done more research in this area than I have. But the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, the places responsible for regulating stress hormones and all the other bits and pieces. When we dance, when we do these things, we create more endorphins. You'll know more chemicals than me. We've got endorphins, serotonin, dopamine, which is the brain's reward system. All these things which add cannabinoids, I've just discovered as a brand new hormone which helps with that, be happy thing, which is new to me.
This is why CBDs are quite good.
Well, that mimics, that effectively
CBD oil,
Well, CBD oil effectively does the same thing as your endocannabinoids do in your natural response.
Yeah, because you have receptor sites in your body throughout the endocannabinoid system. But also dancing will also lower things like cortisol, right? Because you're moving your body, so that stress. Dancing is brilliant. It's brilliant for your brain health as you age as well, because you're moving your body whilst remembering steps or coming up with new steps. I've actually always thought I've got a secret fantasy, even though I'd never really watched what's it called?
not a film. Dancing. It's going to be a bad film, isn't it?
One of the reasons that I would like to be, I don't want to be famous, as it were, but I'd like to be famous within my industry for my knowledge. But there's 2 reasons why I think it's quite nice to be quite successful and quite famous. One is you get to meet other high-performing, successful people. But the second thing, if you're like super successful, you get invited on Strictly Come Dancing. And I would love to do Strictly Come Dancing, because I think that would be brilliant, because it's such a physically demanding thing, and I really want to learn how to dance well. So that would be a great thing.
Listen, you heard it here first.
You were talking about dancing, but
it's good. It's good to dream. Maybe everyone share this show, and maybe we can make you famous that way around. But
actually, when you were talking about stress, I'm not sure if you know this story or not, but it's one that I share sometimes, because sometimes people think stress is bad, or you've got like this idea of eustress, which is, I guess, the good stress that is enough that actually helps build
zone of stress.
And the reality is with stress as well is that it's usually your perception. We've talked about this in the first podcast. Nothing means anything except for the meaning that you give it. So if you choose that something is a bad stress for you, it's likely to have a bad effect on you, versus if you think the same stressor you decide is a good stress for you, actually it's going to be different. It's going to be your perception of it. But the story I wanted to share was of Biosphere 2. Have you heard of Biosphere 2? I'm not sure if you have or not, but it was this habitat that they built to try and mimic what it would be like to live on Mars. So they had this enclosed place where scientists could live and work for like 2 or 3 years. And it was completely closed off from the rest of the world. I think it was somewhere in America, Nevada or wherever. And they gave the scientists everything they needed for those 2-3 years. And they planted lots of trees and all of this. They gave the trees everything they needed: water, nutrients, soil to grow and everything. And what they found was that the trees, they were growing, but they kept falling down. They kept falling down. And it was only after they realized and they started to introduce simulated wind into the environment that the trees were able to grow strong. And it was the stress, like the wind is the stress in this metaphor. The stress is what created the strength for those trees. If we have no stress, and
it's also the reaction.
We know this from a muscle point of view.
Presumably, it's the reaction to the stress, though, right? The reaction to the stress means they form roots. If without the reaction, there's no need for roots, they'll topple over. But the reaction is how we react. And I may be wrong, I don't know anything about this study, but it seems to me that's probably the way they react to it. What I think is really interesting, though, if we bring it back to the first episode where you were talking about nothing has meaning till we give it meaning, and I often talk about, reminding everybody that we're the thinker, not the thought. And we often get that confused. We think because we think of something, therefore it's true. Our thoughts are real. But actually, if we change our thoughts, we change our thinking. We change our thinking, we change how we feel. And thoughts dictate how we feel. And all those things. And all those things I believe are true, and as do you, and we talk a lot about it. What I think was really interesting, and I guess the awareness piece, the insight bit, that's probably the right word I'm looking for. The bit that hit me with insight when I was dancing at a 40th, having a great time, and actually was watching my wife and my daughter dance together, was it's a bit like breathing takes you immediately to the present. When you're dancing like that, you're not thinking about the past, you're not thinking about the future, you just are. You're just in the moment. You are present 100%, losing yourself to something else. And actually, I would argue, in both your way you word it in terms of nothing has meaning to the minute you give it, and mine, I don't think there's any thought going on at all. That's what I would call total flow. And you mentioned the word flow earlier. Being in that flow is what I think most of us want to aspire to be. And that's when we absolutely feel optimistic, we feel joy, we feel happy. There's a lot about this in the book, The Inner Game of Tennis, which I'm a big fan of. It's an old book, but it's a brilliant book. And in that book, he talks about the state of flow. And the inner game of tennis is about, trying to get that state of flow. So if you look at, I always think of Ivan Isavic, even though he's really old and played years ago, but let's think of Roger Federer. He's not thinking all the time about, I need to put my backhand here, my hand up here. He's just playing. He's instinctive. He's in the moment. And it's when, if anyone's watched the recent Netflix series, you watch where the mind starts to take over from flow and they start thinking about shots or everything goes wrong. The minute we start thinking about stuff, we overthink it and everything goes wrong. We're desperately trying to find our state of flow. There's loads of things out there. I've just gone pitch black here, probably seen in the video.
No.
All the lights have just gone off. I feel like I'm in a horror movie. But it's when we're in that state of flow that I think we feel the best we can possibly feel. And whether or not you get there in your meditations, I don't meditate, certainly not to the degree that you do, although I practice mindfulness. But what's your experience of that? Because you mentioned flow earlier in your beat model, and I would argue that that's when we're not really thinking about anything at all, or we're not aware of them anyway. And yet, I'm
not sure in what context I mentioned it before, but I think flow is an interesting state, and it's not one that I necessarily aspire to get into a huge amount of time, because it's not one that you tend to get into on an extended period of basis. Some people do.
I think if you think about it, it becomes handy. But it's counterproductive. If you think about it, it's not possible.
The book, I guess it's The Rise of Superman by Stephen Kotler. Doesn't he talk a lot about flow? I think he does talk about flow. Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, or whatever his name is, he's the one that popularized flow. I mean, the meditation, I've got to say, for me, I remember only probably one time, and this was probably 6 months into my meditations about 12 years ago, where I was just not, there was no thought, and I felt like connected to the entirety of the universe. And then the ego wants to chase back to that stage again and again. So I don't tend to get there with the meditation, if I'm honest. Meditation for me is more of a practice than an achievement, the flow state or anything like that. I'm someone that's always in my head, actually. So that's actually why I want to do things a bit more like dancing, or things. I remember when I was doing a little bit of sparring years ago with the gloves and the boxing. That is also a point where you can't really think. You don't have time to think about the shopping or the bills or what you're going to have for dinner, because if you do, you're going to get hit in the face. And the same with dancing. You've got to be in that. If you're not, then you're going to be quite wooden and stiff.
Everyone listening to this will be able to resonate with the sense that when you're thinking about your dancing, it's not a fun experience.
Terrible.
It's horrible.
It's terrible.
You feel like everyone's watching you. It's when you've probably, for me, I've had a few beers, and I can I'm not. It's just not in my mind. I'm just in the moment. I would call it flow.
But at the beginning, if you're
Dancing like
learning a
crap,
dance or if you're learning something, and again, I come back to Bruce Lee because it's quite interesting. I'm not sure if it was Bruce Lee talking about this or I saw it in some show or something, but I remember that was like a court case, right? And I think the expert martial artist was, on trial for like manslaughter or something like that. And I guess the defense was that it was automated, right? This process of defense that happened. And I think the way that the lawyer proved it to the prosecution lawyers, he had a tennis ball or something, and he threw the tennis ball at the lawyer, and the lawyer just caught it, right? Caught the tennis ball. And he said, well, why did you do that? Because I didn't think about it. I just did it. And it's like, well, exactly. That's the defense of the martial artists, because they'd done 30, 40 years of martial arts. Their instinct was just to act, not to think, and to just do the thing. I guess it was a defense mechanism. You're going to have controlled defense, and this was a show or a movie, so don't take my word for it as being an actual court case or Bruce Lee doing this. But the point I'm trying to make is that a lot of the time you practice a technique over and over and over and over and over and over, so that you don't then have to think about it, so that it becomes instinctual, and that's the idea. But I'm not sure where I was going with this, other than say
let me add on.
That flow comes from a lot of conscious effort to begin with, to become then unconscious again in the activity.
You wouldn't necessarily believe that in the way that I dance. However, we arguably dance from the minute we're born, right? It's something that it's innate within us to want to love music and to dance and to move. Anyway, movement is innately within us, but you wouldn't think I'd had any dancing class at all if you saw me on the dance floor. But interestingly, it made me think about a great book called Bounce, which you may or may not have read. I can't think of the name of the author.
I have, Matthew Syed. I like that book.
So he talks about it. So he's a table tennis world champion and the 10,000 hours of dedicated practice. And he ended up getting there because he lived in a village of loads of other
tiny table tennis.
An ex-Chinese world champion was training them, and all three of them, I think, that lived in that village became world champions at different times. I mean, that's a different thing. The problem was he was playing table tennis, and of course, you've got less than a second to respond to a smashed hit. He doesn't think where his hand goes; it just moves instinctively. He then played tennis. I think he was invited to a Wimbledon.
He was,
and he couldn't hit a thing because he had to think.
It was terrible.
It was absolutely awful, and that's a bit about the flow piece as well. I've been when you don't have to think about it. I just think it's interesting because I'm a massive believer in if we can get control of our thoughts, we can improve the way that we feel. And yet, watching my wife and my child dance around like it didn't matter, like you just don't care, whatever it is. It was just really uplifting, and all the hormones and things that must be released at that time for them. They weren't worried about I was filming or watching or checking or anyone else was watching. They were just in the moment, and that was just pure joy. And I just think that's a nice place to. I don't know how we got to this part of the conversation at all from where we were with your beat model, but it was really, really nice. It does link back to the brain though, and the way that our frontal cortex links to connection. It links to music, which I'm a massive fan of as well. It links to other areas as well of the body, the dopamine response, the reward response, and the release of that, and how that changes us. I just think it was. I think flow is something we should aspire to. I think that's when you don't have to think about it too much. That's when actually maybe that's. I think it's just a great place to be.
I guess the point I'm trying to make with that is that, and I think we talked about it before, that we live in a relativistic universe. So flow is only relevant when there's a state of non-flow.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
You can't. You need a yin and a yang.
Yeah, and we can't always be in that way because it can be sometimes it can be a selfish way to exist, right? For chasing from that, because you're not thinking about other people or other circumstances or influence that you might have elsewhere. And so it's not a place that you can always be, but it's a place that is definitely
so I've got a fun example. Got a fun example of this. It just popped into my head, and it always brings a smile to my face. And I don't want to bore the audience too much. We've rabbited on for a while, but my son, when he was a baby, obviously you got that moment where they take their first steps. Now he's 9 years old now. For the first 8 years of his life, absolutely obsessed with cars. Thousands of them, Matchbox car, any type of car, just cars. I don't know why I'm not interested in cars at all, but he was absolutely fascinated with cars. And he had these 2 Matchbox cars. Now he learned to walk, and we were all excited until we realized he could only walk when he had cars in his hand. Because he wouldn't put them down, he stopped scooting and holding on things, and he would walk right across the room. Took the cars out of his hand, made him think, how do I get from one side to the other? And he couldn't walk. It was the funniest thing as parents. But also the most remarkable thing to observe, if we gave him a card to hand, he was so protective over the cards, he wouldn't put them down. He would grasp them both and literally walk from one side of the room to the next. Take a card out of his hand, and he didn't know how to walk. It was like, wow, that's flow. And it's a bit like if I said to someone, the amount of mechanical things that have to happen in the body to get up now and go and turn that light switch back on, had to do, are loads. To teach someone who didn't know how to do that, you'd have to go, well, first you put pressure on your feet to lift yourself out of the chair, hands on your knees to push yourself up. It's a huge amount of stuff. And yet we do these things every day without thinking that's the flow of just going to the light switch.
Well, yeah.
Sometimes
this is the challenge that all these AI robot engineers are having, right? Because they're trying to teach robots how to get up and do that.
And you've got to program every single...
It actually requires millions of lines of code to do what we perceive to be very simple. But it's not that simple because it took us, years to learn how to do that ourselves.
And over the dawn of time, right? Not just, it's become innate over evolutionary cycles and everything else. Anyway, I don't know how we got here on the old beat model. The old beat model, I have to say, is fantastic. And for those that haven't want to know more, I think they should go and check the show notes, get your book. I know you've already had some orders actually of the Thought Gym, so people have listened.
Well, yes, the Thought Gym, the book that will come out. We haven't finalized the title, but if you're listening to it now, hopefully it will come out at some point this year. So head to my website is the best place because I'm not sure where it will be available, but hari.hk, so Hari is the way you spell my name, hari.hk, and that'll take you to my website, and that will have all the different things there. And hopefully in the next 6 months or so, that book will be out, and that will be a big book and a small book. There'll be 2 versions of it that cover the beat model. One with all the bells and whistles, and one with the short reader guide version as well.
The Blink version. But I think the key thing to remember is over the course of however many episodes you end up recording, there isn't going to be much we're going to tackle that doesn't fall into one of those buckets. That's the reality.
Absolutely. Well, the reality is everything that I've discovered when it comes to health, well-being, longevity, mindset, all the things that we're interested in talking about ultimately fall into one of those 4 areas, which is why I like this, because it's a comprehensive but yet simple, robust model, and it puts together things in a nice way that people can take it away and remember, hopefully a lot easier than all the different things I have to think about.
We'll need to plan a session on our nutritional debate, of which I will share a
that would be good, because my thoughts have evolved on that significantly, and I will say probably on the episode that we do that just because you eat this way at this point in your life and it's the right thing for you to do doesn't mean that it will still be the right way in 6 months or 6 years. And you have to be open to change and not be tied to the identity of a food religion.
Well, I love that, because now we're talking about the authenticity paradox and other things that we can get into, which I'm really excited about. What I am going to mention to close off, as I followed your lead, for listeners that haven't done this yet, and you may have felt compelled to do so from a previous recording, Hari talked about one of his many terrible movies that he's watched. One of those was I think it was called Idiosyncrasy.
Idiocracy.
I did watch that movie. Not only that, I got my whole family to watch. We're on holiday. I mean, what a crocket of rubbish. And that's me choosing not to choose a swear word there. However, you are absolutely on point with using that as a point of reference. It absolutely did what you said it would do. But please don't waste your time watching what is a terrible, terrible movie.
I mean, you can get most of it from the first 20 minutes or so, like what I'm talking about. You can get the idea from the first 20 minutes. Yeah.
It has, however, for those that listened to episode 1, completely put me off watching Joe versus the volcano. Yeah.
That wasn't a great movie either, but there was just interesting takeaways. But I will try and dig out the Les Brown story of that, because that's really quite nice to listen to. He does a great job. Yeah.
Hari, it's been a pleasure as always. Hopefully those that listened have taken something away from today. If nothing else, just take away the beat model. Just remind people what the BEAT stand for, and then we'll sign off.
Yeah. So B for brain, E for elements, A for activity, T for tranquility. And there's a blog on hari.hk. You can find that. It's called The Most Important Blog You'll Ever Read. And it's on the front page, and it will explain it in more detail.
Gosh, there we go. Listen, everyone, thanks for joining us. We'll see you again in a week's time. Cheers, Hari.
See you later, guys. Bye.